adoption over abortion, but that's never going to happen in the state of Maine or in New England. Frankly, our education system is a disaster. We have to get rid of the woke education. This is attack politics. It's about ego and money. Follow the money and follow the ego.
Welcome back to The Bridge. I'm here with our fantastic former governor of Maine, Paul LePage, and I'm here to just ask him some simple questions and get a read on how his first 8 years went, what he would have done if he was re-elected governor, get some commentary on the current policies that our current governor are pushing forward, what he thinks, if they're good or not, and what type of consequences they could have. What we could do better on the campaign next time around, a whole bunch of different things. So I've already kind of given a little intro, but I'll let you introduce yourself a little bit.
Yeah, Paul LePage. I served as governor of the state of Maine from 2011 to January 2019. I ran in the last cycle to try to recapture the Blaine House away from Janet Mills. I think that the state is going in a horrible direction. And so is the country. And I just think that we got a lot of work to do if we're going to save ourselves.
And, okay, so let's start off with the campaign. This previous campaign, the 2022 cycle, is rather special in my mind because it was my first campaign I ever worked on and started off at your kickoff event. What did we do right?
I think our policies are basically superior to the policies of the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party is just spending federal borrowed money, and the country is heading in an awful position with high debt. I'm concerned for our credit rating, internationally. I think it's a real bad situation. What we did right in the state of Maine, I think our policies on education, on welfare, on nursing homes, we were superior policies. Where we failed, and I take the full blame for it because I should have been aware of it and I should have stopped it, is the whole position that the Democrats took on abortion. In the state of Maine, the law is a good law. It's as good a law as you're going to get in the political climate that we find ourselves in. It has viability of the children, of the baby, so it protects the baby once the baby is viable. It protects the mom's health, and it protects against rape and incest, and I think that is appropriate. I would like to see adoption over abortion, but that's never going to happen in the state of Maine or in New England. So I think the law is appropriate. Unfortunately, the current governor lied through the whole campaign, saying that she believed in the same thing I believe, except that now they're going to completely change the law and they'll allow abortion up to birth.
You say I've heard a lot of press on that. What are your opinions on that?
I'm very.
Because I remember actually was it the first or second debate you guys discussed that, and both of you said that you weren't going to change it.
Yeah, it was the first debate, and this is the way I feel about it. Once a baby's viable, there's some issues here, and they're appropriate issues. A baby could be viable as far as life, but the baby might be very, very crippled and low functioning. And in that situation, I think the medical profession and the parent should decide what's best. I don't think government should be involved.
Sure.
From a standpoint of my opponent, she said she would not change it. She liked the law. Right now, they're in the process of changing it, and they're going to allow abortion. As I understand it, it's going to have abortion up until the first breath. That is outrageous.
That's too far.
That is the same position that actually it's actually a little bit better than the governor of Virginia wanted, because he was going to allow the baby to be born and then decide whether they're going to keep it or not. And I think that to me has gone way too far.
Sure. Now, what do you think about our economic state? I know that's a very broad question, but we can definitely see we are in a much worse economic state now than we were back in your first and second term.
Yeah, well, actually, it's disguised a bit right now because it's even worse than what it appears.
Sure.
Because the revenues coming into the state are inflated dollars because of the high inflation. I didn't have to deal with inflation, and we haven't seen inflation for 40 years. If you've lived in inflation, watch out. Once the money's gone, it is going to be horrific, and this governor will be forced to raise taxes. And it's either raise taxes or eliminate services, which she's already had a tax on the elderly. Group homes and nursing homes have not been treated very fairly under this governor.
Now, what would you have done? Okay, so let's say you were elected. Inflation, 8%, right around there. What would you have done to fight against that? Bidenflation, as many people in the media call it. But what could we have done at the state level to fight against it?
There's several things you could have done. One is you take the tolls off the highway because 80% of the food coming in is on trucks. I would have suspended the fuel tax through the winter months so they would take the pressure off the gasoline and heating oil. I would not have net metering. Net metering is going to be the Achilles of the state of Maine. It's going to cause electricity costs to skyrocket, as we're seeing right now here in January. Prices have gone up 50%. With high energy costs, you cannot utilize your biggest asset, which is your forest, because it is so demanding on high energy. This whole idea on the NEEC line, the transmission line, it is wrong what's happening. The people that are against that are doing a major disservice to the people of Maine and to the businesses in Maine. And it's just a shame. And it's all about ego and money.
Sure.
It's about ego and money. Follow the money and follow the egos.
Now, what would you have done? Okay, so the Biden administration during the pandemic and all the way through now have given quite a bit of money to the states. What would you have done with that money? I mean, Mills gave a lot of it out in checks and some of it towards education, but a lot of it came out in re-elect me checks. What would you have done?
First of all, the $850 check would not have gone out. I would have fixed our infrastructure. In other words, we have enormous old legacy systems at the state. I would have upgraded those. I would have upgraded, for instance, automobiles. It takes 7 or 8 weeks to get your title to a vehicle once you buy it. I would have fixed that. In Florida, for instance, you go in, you buy a car, you walk away from the dealer with your plate and your title.
Yeah.
It's all in one. And there's no reason we can't do that here. That's one of the things. Bridges and roads, I would have put a lot of money into bridges and roads. Frankly, our education system is a disaster. It needs an overhaul. We have to get rid of the woke education, and we have to go back to where we were back in the 80s, where we teach reading, writing, and math. And we're not doing that now. What we're doing is the schools have taken away the rights of a parent, and that we have to go back and allow the parents to be parents and allow teachers to be teachers.
Now, would you have been interested in maybe doing what Florida did with a parental rights and education type bill?
Absolutely. That was one of our big campaigns, and that's why the schools voted so hard against me. Teachers do not want accountability. In other words, if you have a parent's bill of rights, that means the parents have a say in their children's education. They have the right to know what is being taught and the education system. And let me be clear. I said teachers. It's not the teachers. It's the teachers union.
Yeah.
It's not the teachers. There are super great teachers out there, and they're just not allowed to teach. They're forced into being parents. And
Sure.
we need to have a system where the teachers are allowed to teach. They have autonomy in the classroom, and they work with our kids. But this idea that they're the parents and the parents can't have a say is outrageous.
Now, would you have had any policy ideas to maybe help with the retirement system for teachers and veterans and a few other groups that there's usually a lot of complaints that the retirement system is unfair to them.
Yeah, it's
especially in terms of like double dipping and things like that.
well, double dipping is a problem, and I don't agree with double dipping. I think that's not right. But there is a problem with the retirement system, and there are several states in the country that have the same problem. Uh, if you're in the main retirement system, you have a set aside on your Social Security. So if you weren't a teacher and you didn't do your whole career in the retirement system of Maine, you lose a whole lot of Social Security. That can be fixed. And it can be fixed both at the federal level and it could be fixed here in Maine. Ideally, I think we should take the Maine retirement system, turn it into a 401k to the individual, put the individual accounts and the money that they're entitled to into a 401k, and then move the whole system to Social Security.
That would be a really interesting way to go. Now, would there be a way you could maybe help some of the individuals who have been, I guess you could say, hurt by that system? I mean, I know someone who, her husband was a veteran and she received his benefits, and then as soon as she retired from the Maine state education system, she was no longer able to receive his benefits. He had passed away a while ago.
Yeah, she does.
Military benefits. Sorry, I forgot to specify that.
Yeah, military benefits don't follow.
Okay.
And I don't know that's a federal issue. That's
sure. So that's a federal issue.
That's a federal issue. But the Maine retirement system, the problem is this: if you're a teacher and your spouse is not a teacher, is working in the Social Security system, when you retire, you get penalized.
Yeah. And
that's where we need to fix. And that could be fixed. Unfortunately, the unions don't want to fix it. Never. The people get hurt, but for some reason the union fight against fixing it. So I don't.
Sure.
There is a system over there. It's been there since about 2008 or 9 that could be brought in and modify the state retirement system to solve a lot of these problems. But Democrats have been against it.
Okay. Now, we've talked a lot about education and some different issues like that, different social issues like abortion. What did you do after after King and Baldacci and what did you do to really fix the economic state of our state back in the early days?
If you're an able-bodied person, you have to go to work. I did not pay people to stay home. That is that simple. It is that simple. If you're able-bodied, you have to get a job and contribute to society. Right now, under this administration right now, they are paying you to stay home, and the able-bodied people are not working. We are the oldest state in America. Therefore, if you're able-bodied, and you have to contribute to society. The other thing that I would do is if the President of the United States sends a whole lot of people to Maine and says they'll get benefits, then I would put them to work. If he can break federal law, then so can the governor.
Yeah, exactly. But like, what were the specific policies you put forward? You and I had a conversation before this. You gave me some specific numbers that I'm trying to remember. You gave me exact numbers that we were in the red. What were those numbers again?
When I took over, we had a shortfall of $1.3 billion.
Yep.
And about $1 billion of it was caused by Angus King when he was governor, and when John Baldacci was governor, it grew another $300 million. John Baldacci had some good ideas, but they were implemented incorrectly. For instance, he changed the education system, and it was okay. He wanted to consolidate education. We are very, very top heavy in education. The problem was nobody lost their jobs. You cannot consolidate and continue spending the same amount of money. You have to have some savings. That was one problem he had. And then Dirigo, Maine, which was a health insurance, he wanted to have a one-payer system. Doesn't work. It was tried in many states. It doesn't work. It failed here in Maine. I think it cost the taxpayer somewhere around $160 million. We had PL90, which was a program that had a high-risk pool, and it lowered the premiums of elderly. People would not be faced with catastrophic illnesses because the high-risk pool would take over. The Democrats, for some reason, hate that system because it's not a one-payer system.
Sure. What were some other things you did to really bring us out of the red? I mean, those are some pretty high numbers, especially for a state level issue. What were some of the other things that you did to really balance
Welfare.
the books?
We welfare. When I took over, Medicaid was about 20. It was one of the highest. I believe it was approaching 30%. It was like 350,000 people on it. We brought it down to about 270 and saved hundreds of millions of dollars. And what we did is you put people on Obamacare. You see, what people don't understand is Obamacare is subsidized. So if you're poor, Obamacare is very, very expensive, but the federal government will subsidize it. And so your out of pocket is very, very little. And if you wanted to make it free, then you pay the balance of the premium instead of putting them on Medicaid. The problem with Medicaid, the reimbursements to the hospitals and to doctors is below cost.
Sure.
And they don't want it. So the best thing to do is put them on Obamacare and pay the premium.
Sure.
Then the federal government and the state are involved in a partnership. That's how you lower the cost. That's one thing. The other thing we did is Baldacci had leased out the liquor business, and the state was getting $10 million a year. We brought it back in-house, and we have control of it. Now it's making $55 million a year. So it's those little things. No one thing will fix it, but there's a whole lot of little things that we can do. Another one, Marginal Way in Portland. We had DHHS had an office in Marginal Way in Portland. We were paying $32 a square foot. The landlord wanted to increase it to 35. I wanted to go to 25, and they said no. So what we did is we went up to South Portland at the airport, built a new building. Now we're paying 19. We saved $14 million on one lease.
Wow. That's impressive.
And we've done that. We've done it in Bangor. We've done it here in Augusta. I know a lot of people get angry. Right now, the Public Utilities Commission is on that beautiful building on a 95. You see when you're coming up into Augusta on the right. We went to look at it. We wanted to lease it, but they wanted too much money, so we didn't lease it. The minute I left, they leased it, and they're paying an enormous amount of rent.
Jeez. Huh.
Where the state police are, same thing. They wanted to increase the rent significantly. I said, no, we're going to move. Then they conceded, and they're still there, and we're paying less now than we did 10 years ago.
That's impressive.
So these are the type of things that a businessman can do. If you use business principles, then you can do an awful lot of good.
Well, I think you're the one who coined the statement is, what was it? A businessman can be a politician. I'm trying to remember.
Yeah,
what was the statement you used?
A businessman can learn to be a politician, but a politician cannot become a businessman.
That's what it was, and it holds quite true.
It's a learned process. This governor, while I'm sure she means well, although she's a little bit morally flexible with the truth, I'm sure that she means well, but she doesn't have the skill set to run an organization the size of the state of Maine.
Sure. Okay, so we've covered a lot of things like education and the economy. One of the things you campaigned on quite heavily was the drug crisis. What would you do? I think you mentioned things like EBT cards and maybe some rehabilitation centers. With the drug crisis getting worse and worse in this nation, what would you do to try to help the state of Maine? I know it's a broad question, but...
Well, first of all, you've got to have law enforcement. You have to, all of the above. You have to have law enforcement. you have to you first of all you got to have treatment, you have to have education, and you have to get the drug dealers off the streets. You cannot, and it's getting worse by the day because we have a president that opened up the border to the drug cartels and they're in control. And until somebody stops that, and it needs to stop, the president of the United States should work with the governors and stop the flow of drugs into the country. That's number one. Number two, yes, we wanted to have a 200-bed treatment facility. We were going to build it in Wyndham. Somehow it never got built. It just never got built, and it was earmarked to be built. This governor takes a holistic view of drug crisis. Now, they believe that everybody should have Narcan. Narcan is false security.
Yep.
The problem with Narcan is it'll save your life. If it could save your life today and you go into rehab tomorrow, then I would be for it. But when you're giving people Narcan 4 and 5 and 6 times, it's only a false security. Eventually, it will kill you. And that's the problem. And so I do believe we have to have programs in our jails. We got to have programs in our schools. We have to have programs. We should be investing in programs to get people off drugs. But fentanyl is a killer, and nobody seems to be worried about it. You need to be stopping cars coming in. You got to stop the boats from dropping, bringing the drugs in by the water. There's just a whole lot that needs to be done. You cannot stick your head in the ground and think your problem is going to go away.
Interesting. I remember you mentioned this on the campaign trail quite a bit. The 200-bed facility in Wyndham. Now, that was a project you got started, correct?
Yes.
And you mentioned it never got built. Like, what happened there?
All the engineering was done. We were supposed to break ground in April of 2019. I turned out in January. She came in and scrapped the whole project. She took the money, a lot of the money, and built the jail in Washington County. Fine. It's the furthest jail away. It was very costly. Look, if we need the jail, fine. But they built a jail. They built a prison in Washington County, and now they're thinking of closing one in other parts of the state. We have too many. That I don't know. I just don't understand the logic.
So prison instead of rehabilitation, and then you said they're closing another facility?
Yeah, we have a facility for kids, for adolescents and teenagers, and they're trying to close it instead of converting it to a drug rehabilitation center. I would not close it. I would convert it to a drug rehabilitation center.
Sure. And back to the economy, I meant to ask this question a bit ago. People my age, we all know Generation Z sometimes doesn't have the greatest work ethic. What would you do to incentivize people my age to stay in the state? Because this state has a reputation. It's where people go to retire or go to die. And sometimes that holds true. What would you do to really get people my age to stay here and invest their time and money?
2 things. Number one is I make the community college part of the education system. So instead of going with K through 12, I would go with K through 14, so that kids graduating out of high school would have more opportunities in the trades and in technical areas, so that they could stay here and it would be free. Now, it would be free as long as they stay and live in Maine. If they leave Maine, then they'd have to pay back the loan or the cost of the education, number one. Number two, I would take university degrees. People that go on to university and have student debt, I would tie the student debt to the job. Have the employer pay the debt off. The person, as long as the person works for the employer for, let's say, 5, 7, 10 years, whatever contract they agree to, and then the state would give full reimbursement to the debt that was paid off. So we would keep the people here in the state. They would not have student debt. They'd have a job. The employer would be reimbursed, and we would use income tax to lower the overall cost. That's one way of eliminating the income tax.
Interesting. Now you mentioned K through 14.
She's doing it now for years. If you graduate high school in 2021, 22.
I'm actually one of the people. I'm benefiting from it. I'm going to Eastern Maine Community College because of that program.
And that's fine. My point is make it permanent.
Make it permanent. Okay. Now, would you still have the separate community college facilities, or would you try to make our individual high schools K through 14?
I would.
I guess what I mean is, would you have?
I would. All construction in high schools would be tech. See, the problem that I see right now is we've separated the academic to the technical, and I don't think you should. It should be one system. You should be able to go to high school and want to take, let's say, college courses and technical courses. For instance, carpentry, welding. I think there should be all one school. Then the community college it's another layer from a diploma to an associate's degree. I think it should be permanent. I really do. I would also convert the community college back to technical colleges. I don't think that community college is working. I think what's happened is we've gotten away from the trades. That was one way of eliminating the trades. And 50% of the kids that go on to the community college have to do remedial work, which tells me that our K through 12 is failing our kids.
Interesting. Now, what makes, given that I'm in the community college system, I have some opinions, and I agree with you. But what makes you say that we've gotten away from the trades?
Because the community college, that's what they are. They're liberal arts. They're doing all academic courses.
Yeah.
They're doing an awful lot more academic courses than they used to. And I don't have a problem with that. That's fine. But what is wrong with it is that the kids coming out of high school have to take remedial work before they can go on to the college degree. That's the problem. We're failing our kids in K through 12, and the kids that go on to community college right now have to pay for the failure of for not having learned what they were supposed to learn in high school, which I feel is a failure.
Sure. Now, what would you do? I know there's different programs like Tri-County Technical Center and UTC and things like that. You mentioned having a focus on the trades. What would you do to really make sure we have that type of education in our high schools, especially more rural, smaller schools that might struggle to get those type of resources?
Every new school that would be built would have to have the technical side. For instance, Sanford High School, it's a brand new high school. They have the technical. Waterville, they have technical. It is in the building. The problem is, in some cases, they treat the technical as secondary citizens. The trades have got to be front and center.
Sure.
The front of the school, not the back of the school.
Very interesting. Very interesting. What would you do for, like, maybe economic education? I mean, I guess that there's a lot of things that it's almost sad it has to come from the state level government, but there seems to be a lack of focus on the trades, economic education, classes like home ec, things like that. I know I sound like my father, but
that's the union.
Yeah.
That is the union. The unions do not want the technical education because it takes money.
Sure.
And the other thing that's wrong with the system is it's very difficult to find a plumber, a millwright, a person who's done his career in the trade and go into the classroom. So the teachers union has been fighting alternative methods of certification for teachers. I believe teachers need to be certified. I don't want pedophiles in the classroom. But at the same token, they refuse to allow alternative methods of certification. And that's the way that they control who's in the teaching industry. I think that there are many different ways that we could have alternative methods. For instance, I'll give you an example. I taught at the University of Maine Orono. I've taught at the community college system. I've taught at University of Maine Augusta, Husson College, Thomas College. I have taught in all those schools. But I cannot teach an economics course or a financial literacy course in a high school
Interesting.
in the state of Maine, because I'm not certified. I can teach master's degree level courses, but I can't teach how to balance a checkbook in a high school.
Very interesting. Now, I guess what makes you say that? Like, I mean, you
Because I'm
think
not certified. I don't
Interesting.
have a teacher's certificate
okay,
from the
Yep.
union. The law in Maine says to teach in high school, you have to have a certificate.
okay, sure. Okay, so a totally different topic, but on the campaign this time around, the 2022 cycle, we did a lot of things right. We had, I think Aaron said it was one of the biggest field teams we've ever had.
Yeah.
It was one of the strongest, one of the most dedicated and excited. I could see it. There was a level of excitement that I don't know if I've ever seen before from people I knew that did a lot of campaigning. What could we do differently next time around to get out the vote? I know that's a broad question, but I think given that you were one of the top candidates, you might have some.
As long
ideas.
as the Republican Party, the two things that I saw this cycle that is really bad. One is Donald Trump. Donald Trump going around and telling people your vote doesn't count because the elections are stolen was wrong. I disagree with that. Is there some problems? Yeah, we could improve, and we could fix our election laws to make sure that people have an ID. I believe if you had a voter ID, it solves an awful lot of problems. But I think Donald Trump was a major factor in this election. So to get out the vote, the Republican Party has got to understand that early voting is not bad. Absentee voting is not bad. For some reason, Republicans want to vote in person on election day, and they wait and wait and wait, and then something comes up and they can't get to the polls. My point is, once you're able to vote as early as possible. I think that's nothing wrong with that. Now, that is different than mass mailings and sending people ballots by mail. I'm not for that. I'm not for harvesting votes. But early voting, absentee voting is worked for years and years and years, and we should encourage people to vote as early as possible. If you can go to your town hall and vote early, do it. As you drive by, stop and vote. But we don't want to do that. For some reason, Republicans hate doing that. And we go into election day, we're 200 to 300,000 votes behind because of Democrats have been voting steady every day. We need to learn to grow up.
Sure.
And the other thing we need to do is we need to modernize the party. The party's a little too old-fashioned. And I think it's time that we take a look at our platform and we get some of the social stuff out of there, and we worry about family, we worry about economics, we worry about safety, and those are the things that we need to worry about. This governor, for instance, she's closing nursing homes and group homes. It's the worst thing we could be doing, because what we're doing is we're forcing people out of the workforce. Because if you have a loved one and they're in a group home or they're elderly and they close the nursing home, you got to give up your job and take care of your family member. We shouldn't have to do that. And she's been doing that. She's been doing that in rural areas, and that's horrible. I think we lost like 7 group homes in the last few years. It's just horrible. Caribou Nursing Home, the Veterans Nursing Home, nobody was saying a word about it until Susan Collins and I made an issue of it, and then she decided to keep it open for the balance of 2022. We don't know if she's going to close it now. She hasn't committed.
Wow. Very interesting. Very interesting. So we talked about, you mentioned modernizing the party. What specifically would you say we need to modernize?
We got to get out of the social issues.
No, what do you mean by that?
Abortion shouldn't be in our platform. Gay marriage should not be in our platform. That has nothing to do with running a good society. That's not good public policy. It's antiquated. It's gone. We've lost that battle. Let's move on.
Now, do you think certain parts of those could be like, even if you just said broadly we're pro-life, but you didn't even say, in certain states they've tried to reduce like back down to 15 weeks or something like that.
None of that should be in your platform.
None of it at all. Now, what about like
It
LGBTQ rights for children type thing? Obviously, maybe push against that. Should that be in the platform or
No,
just
it
policies?
doesn't need to be. That's policy. That's public policy. We need good public policy. We should encourage safety. We should encourage family. We should encourage religion. You know, the state of Maine is the least religious state in the country.
Mm-hmm.
We're 50th. That's what we need to be worried about. We need to be worried about building the family up. And so we take these social issues and we go to extremes. For instance, a lot of Republicans didn't vote for me this time around because I wasn't strict enough on abortion. I'm sorry. To me, abortion is between a doctor and a woman.
Sure. And I guess the what? I heard this is a couple of concerns I heard from different people on the campaign trail. They didn't hear specifics on whether you were pro-life or
I'm pro-life.
pro-abortion or...
I am pro-life 100%. I prefer adoption over abortion, but I am a man. It's not my decision to tell a woman that I do believe viability. I believe that once the baby is in the womb and is viable, then I think the doctor and the woman have to decide what's the next step. If the baby's going to be in a wheelchair or is going to be very, very low functioning and have to have nurses and with them 24/7, then somebody's got to make some decisions. That's not political. That should not be political. I really don't believe that. I believe we should encourage women to go to term, and if you're going to give an abortion, then the state ought to pay to have the baby to term.
Okay. And
I've never, ever been for abortion, but I'm going to follow the law of the state of Maine. Whatever the law is, I will enforce the law. I do not believe that government should be in the business of abortions.
And quite honestly, I think some of the more specific details we might have some disagreements on, but I definitely agree. Probably government should get out of abortion in general. I mean, the fact that it's so hyper-political makes it...
I think they should be out of it.
Yeah.
I think I do agree, women's choice, it's their body, they make the decision. Having said that, I also believe the same thing about vaccines. It's your body, your decision. You should not be forced to take a vaccine.
Now, for individuals that were in the workforce during the pandemic and were kicked out of the workforce because of that, would you try to push to get them so they can have their former positions back?
I'd make that illegal. I would fight to make that illegal. Right now.
Make illegal as in being pushed out of your...
illegal to force somebody out because of vaccination.
Sure.
Now, let's take a look at this. We have Johnson & Johnson, who now had their vaccine. A lot of people took their vaccine. They are no longer providing a vaccine. They pulled it out because it doesn't work. If a vaccine for polio, you get a vaccine for polio, that vaccine will prevent polio. A vaccine for COVID does not prevent COVID.
Yep.
And they promised us when they came out that would.
Well, I was... the Daily Wire, Michael Knowles, I really like to listen to his podcast. And they released some footage that went public from a Pfizer employee who was out to dinner with a friend of his. And the friend was recording and got on recording the Pfizer employee saying there's a potential of Pfizer taking COVID, doing gain-of-function research themselves to continue to have a monopoly on the business, in making mRNA vaccines for COVID. Interesting. What do you think on that? I know you probably haven't heard that. That was quite new.
We're always going to have issues with health. I mean, we're all going to live and then we're going to die. And there is always going to be, the COVIDs are going to come in, whether it's COVID or whatever. And that's why we have medical research. And we have to continue the medical research. We have to continue. The conspiracy theories, they bother me. I just get concerned about it. My issue is this. Unless you can tell me that a vaccine will absolutely prevent you from getting it, then you should not be forced to put it into your body.
Sure.
And that's my whole issue. COVID, people will have 2 vaccines, 2 boosters, and they get COVID twice.
Yep.
I mean, that's just not right.
Logically, it doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense. Now, polio, you get 1 polio shot. To make the COVID part of the series of vaccines that you got to have for schools, I think is wrong.
Yep.
Totally wrong. I just think we in Maine, New York, and a lot of these blue states are using COVID as a fear
Fear factor. Yep.
Yeah, a fear factor against society, and I just it's social engineering, and I don't agree.
Now, what do you think about vaccine mandates in general? Like you mentioned, the polio vaccine that actually works. What do you think about mandating those type vaccines or giving requirements? If you want to go to school, you've got to have X, Y, and Z.
I have a problem with preventing schools. The Constitution of the state of Maine says that a community will educate its children at its own expense. So we're already violating the Constitution in the state of Maine. To say that they have to have vaccines really concerns me. If that's the case, then the school has to provide another form of education. So, do you send the traveling teacher? I don't know. But technically, that's, if you go by the Constitution, then I believe the community is required to provide some form of education, whether they take a vaccine or not. And to force people to put stuff in their body concerns me.
Yeah. Very interesting, very interesting. No, I mean, I don't know if I've ever...
I take a libertarian view when it comes to putting foreign material in your body. Can the government come in and say you have to take fentanyl?
No.
Why?
Exactly.
It says you have to take COVID.
It's a very interesting point.
I mean,
yeah.
Some people have some adverse reactions to vaccines. That's a poison.
So let me see if I'm thinking of this right. If you get rid of mandates, you also avoid a lot of the issues with exemptions.
That is correct.
Because I've seen a lot of issues there.
And I think it was absolutely incredulous for this governor to take away the medical exemption, the religious exemption, and the philosophical exemption. Now, she says, I did not take away the medical exemption. Yes, you did. Because if you allow the medical exemption, but then you take the license of a doctor who issues a medical exemption, then that's...
Yeah.
What's that doing? That's preventing doctors from wanting to give exemptions.
Yep.
And so... I think she totally mishandled COVID.
Yep.
I think she followed Cuomo, New York Governor Cuomo, all the way, and whatever he did, she did. And I also believe that her sister, who's a doctor, had a big influence on how the state handled COVID.
Sure. No, you're 100% right. Well, you mentioned exemptions, and we discussed that a little bit. I got lucky. I was able to get one. I mean, I don't know if I've ever made this public, but I had the first 2 vaccines, the first 2 shots. I had been 2.5 years seizure-free. I'm an epileptic. I had some of the worst epileptic seizures after those shots that I've ever had in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And so I got lucky, the fact that I was able to get an exemption from my primary care, from the booster, But I could tell just by the way we were having a discussion, I was of the few that he'd probably ever given.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
See, I have a real hard time when they say you can't go to University of Maine, you can't go to technical college without the shot. I just have a real hard time with that.
Yeah.
We're the oldest state in the union. You have to have alternative methods.
Sure.
You can have, why can't you have a part of a classroom where if you don't have the shot, you go to you go to this class.
No, this is an answer I can't get out of people on the opposite side of the aisle, or I guess you could say more center of the line Republicans. If you have the vaccine, let's say the COVID vaccine was as effective as the media made it sound to be, going by their own logic, why should we have to separate those type classes? Why should we have to separate groups? If that individual who is vaccinated, if it works the way it does, theoretically, they shouldn't be worried if someone like you or me isn't
But it
vaccinated
doesn't work.
around them.
We
Exactly.
all know it doesn't work. They just don't want to say it.
Exactly.
I mean, it didn't work. It failed. The vaccine for COVID-19 failed.
But going by their own logic and what they claim.
And the Delta failed. I mean, the mutations failed. Everything has failed on COVID. COVID vaccine is not like other vaccines.
Yep.
I'm sorry, you can't. So like I said earlier, you can have the two primary shots, then you can have two boosters, and then you can catch COVID twice.
It doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense. It was a failure, and they refused to acknowledge it. This is one place where I agree with DeSantis and Youngkin and some of these Republican governors is, look, be safe, be diligent, don't go asking for trouble, but the vaccines haven't worked. Now,
Yeah.
I don't feel the same where science has absolutely proven that if you get a vaccine, you will not get the disease. That like polio, for instance, you can eradicate some of these, but we're nowhere near that with COVID.
Yep. No, 100%. Well, I'm guessing, we haven't necessarily discussed lockdowns and those type of policy decisions that Mills made. What were your opinions on?
I would have never locked down. I think it was insane to lock down the entire state. What I would have done, had I been the governor at the time, I would have had 16 emergency response teams, one per county.
Yep.
And I've monitored each lockdown by counties. I would have, do I believe that certain counties needed to be locked down, like Cumberland County? Yeah. But Piscataquis, I think it was 10 months or 11 months before they got their first case of COVID. Why did they lock that county down for 11 months?
I'm from there. Living right there in Guilford, I think we had 3 cases for, it was close to all of 2020.
Yeah.
We were one of the lowest we had some of the lowest totals in the entire nation. And during June, Trump came, and you would have thought, by looking at the town, the thousands of people that were there, just by rough estimate, it would have been some super spreader event.
Yeah.
It didn't happen.
That's right. He called it, the media was calling it super spreader. The way I think the mistake that we made is we chased the spread. The country as a whole, where we were chasing the spread, and it came from Fauci. And instead of identifying, and 60 days in, we knew who were the most vulnerable.
Sure.
And instead of chasing the most vulnerable and protecting them, what we did is we forced it on everybody. And I think that was the major mistake. I think we should have gone, particularly in a rural state like Maine, I think you go by county, and you identify your elderly, you identify people with and you could do that through the primary care physicians, and you could do that through Medicaid. Identify who are the most vulnerable and try to get them protected.
Sure.
Those are the issues. To me, chasing the super spreading, the trying to prevent the spread was just not the right way.
No, a lot of the things we've discussed recently, we've mentioned things regarding healthcare, it's a pretty obvious issue all over the nation that healthcare costs are astronomically high. And people on the left are pushing things like socialized medicine, and the right quite often seems to say we can't do socialized medicine, but they fail to give anything else.
Well,
What would your ideas be on, like, what could we do to lower the cost of healthcare?
Force the hospitals and force doctors to have price lists on the services they provide.
Price lists, you
yeah.
said, yep.
If you're going to have an operation, what's it going to cost me? You don't see it. A patient doesn't see anything. It's between the insurance company and the hospitals. And you can't go down and itemize it. You used to be able to you'd get a bill from the hospital. You could go down and look at everything that they charge you. Say, you didn't give me this, you didn't give me this. You could challenge it. And if you have a price list, then you can go to different hospitals and see what's it going to cost me for surgery in this hospital. What's going to cost me for a knee replacement at Maine Medical versus Maine General.
Yeah.
Give me the price. But they don't do that.
Yeah.
And so we don't know. And so it's artificial.
Sure.
Our billing system's artificial. Now, insurance companies, what do? They get a percentage of what the hospitals charge. So there's no incentive to get efficient.
Jeez.
They get a percentage. They get a 10% markup, or 90% of the premiums go out for services, and then they get 10%. So there's no incentive for them to fight for lower pricing.
Interesting.
And what we need to do, one way we can do it is you go to a physician, you say, here's your 800, and they're doing it now in Florida. In fact, I got kicked. I had a doctor, I qualified, but they wouldn't take Aetna as insurance, so I couldn't get that service. So what they do is they take people that are on Medicare, and they take a population, let's say Daytona. Anybody 65 or over in Daytona goes to this certain doctors. This group of doctors that they'll only take Medicare.
Interesting.
And they get paid they don't get paid fee for service. They get paid a salary to take care of these folks.
Okay.
So instead of having 3,000 patients, this doctor that I know dropped to 800 patients. And he has 800 people, and that's all he does. And he gets a check every month.
Interesting.
He takes care of the people. He doesn't charge them. They come in, he takes care of them, and Medicare sends them a check.
Very interesting. Okay, so we mentioned healthcare in general and like primary care and things like that. Prescription drugs. Okay, so what would you do? I mean, epilepsy meds that I'm on. I mean, there's people like that.
Everybody blames the pharmaceuticals. The problem is the insurance companies. It's not the pharmaceuticals. The pharmaceuticals, they bill a drug, and in order to get it into to have the insurance company pay for it, they have to follow the rules of the insurance company. And they're told how much to charge. For instance, the state of Maine receives, every year, it receives monies from the insurance companies for all the drugs that are sold in Maine. They get a rebate. There's a rebate system. So I asked the pharmaceuticals, why don't you get rid of the rebates? We'd love to. Then I go to the insurance companies and say, why don't you stop the rebates? They have a conniption fit because it's all politics.
Interesting. So it's a huge political game that is causing all those problems.
I'll tell you, to me...
What could you do specifically, though, to bring those prices down, at least at a state level?
The first thing you do is you stop the rebates.
Sure. Very
You say,
interesting.
we want the rebates to go to the drugs.
Okay.
And the other thing, generics.
I'm going to admit ignorance. What do you mean generics? I'm sorry.
Generic drugs are drugs that have they no longer have a patent, or patent is exhausted. You know, the 17 year, and so it becomes a generic,
Oh,
so
I see.
anybody can make it. So it drives the price down.
Oh, so you're talking like
Now this is where the pharmaceuticals are wrong.
Sure.
In the whole pricing of the generics, they fight generics. I don't think they should, but that's a big issue. The other thing I would do is, here in the United States, we pay for R&D. The governments of Canada, governments in other countries, they set pricing that the pharmaceuticals can charge for drugs.
Yep.
So they don't pay for R&D. But Americans, we pay the R&D. We are the highest cost drugs in the world.
Now, what do you think on price caps? Like, I know Trump put in a insulin price cap, and Biden, as soon as he came in, basically saw, all right, that has Trump's name on it, let's get rid of it. Now he introduces it again as if it's his idea. What do you think on price caps?
I'm not big on price controls.
Sure.
I'm not big on price controls. I think what you do is you have more competition.
Yeah.
You
Very
allow
interesting.
competition. That's where the generics come in. Now the problem with generics is the quality control is not always as good, because they've tried generics on a certain drug, a thyroid medication, and I can't take the generics because the quality control is not.
Sure. Sure. Very interesting.
And some of the branded products have much better control. I mean, the quality control is much stronger.
Sure. Sure. I know our time is running low. I just have a
Yeah.
couple more questions. Let's see. This is one issue you brought up on the campaign trail quite a bit. You mentioned EBT cards and having, I think it was a photo ID on them, correct?
Yes.
Well, why necessarily should we have photos on those type cards?
Because it's one of the best ways to fight drugs.
Sure. Now, how specifically would that work?
What happened in October 2015? Every time we did a drug bust, we would find 8 or 10 different EBT cards. Back then, they didn't have pictures. In October 2015, we started putting pictures on EBT cards. After that, every time you got a drug bust, you wouldn't get EBT cards. What is happening is a lot of people use the EBT cards to pay for their drugs. They give the card to the drug dealer. They get their drugs all month long. At the end of the month, on the 10th of the month, when the cards are loaded, the money disappears immediately.
Wow. Interesting.
And we traced where the money goes. 5 major cities in the country. So
Wow.
you can't tell me that there's not a problem. Now, we put them on. Nobody complained. It was voluntary. The elderly didn't mind it at all because it's an ID. Nobody complained. Very, very few complaints. The minute she became governor, she took the pictures off the EBT cards. Why? It's a form of ID. You can't go
Interesting.
anywhere in this country. You can't even get a hotel room without showing an ID.
Yeah.
You can't get on a plane without showing an ID. What is wrong with the government providing the ID?
Yeah, exactly. Interesting. I meant to ask that earlier when we were on the topic of drug rehabilitation, and I forgot to. But that always stuck out on the campaign trail, and it was a very good topic when I was knocking on people's doors to bring up. The last couple really just have to do with campaign tactics. Sounds like a broad question, but I think it's a valid one. Do you think the media treated your campaign and Paula Quinn's campaign fairly in terms of coverage and what they said and did with you guys?
No. It's not just Paula Quinn or myself.
Yeah.
It's just not that way. In America, the media is controlled by the left.
Sure.
End of story. Social media, same way.
Yep.
I don't believe in Facebook. I don't believe in Twitter. I don't believe in Instagram. I don't believe in TikTok because they censor you.
Sure.
There's no freedom of speech anymore in this country. It's controlled by the media.
You're 100% right. No, I agree. Now,
There's only one. I will. Print media is horrible. TV is horrible. A radio, they can edit, but usually it's a more of a discussion, so it's hard to edit.
Yeah.
But yeah, media is. I could name 2 or 3 people in this state that I would respect
Yep.
as journalists. There's no fact checking.
Am I one of them? No, just kidding.
It's just incredible. I mean, in the mainstream media, there's about 3 people in the state of Maine that I think I would respect what they say.
Interesting.
90% are all. It's so bad that the editors of the Portland Press Herald and the editors of Bangor Daily News tell the reporters what they want. They tell them exactly what they want. It has nothing to do with what's right or wrong. This campaign was horrible.
Yeah. Was it worse than previous campaigns in terms of coverage?
It's the worst I've ever seen.
Really?
And what's making it worse now is social media. They censor and they control where your information goes.
Sure.
So people don't. We put stuff on Facebook, and people say I didn't see it, and I watch your Facebook all the time.
Yeah.
So they control. So freedom of speech is gone.
No, you're 100% right. I mean, you and I mentioned abortion earlier, and I think personally I have a little bit more of an ultra conservative view on it, but I should be able to express that view freely. And as soon as that happens, TikTok puts a warning on the bottom of my video, and all of a sudden my viewership goes from about 1,000 views every video to around 50.
Yep, and that's the problem with censorship. Look, not all speech is good speech.
Sure.
But if you're gonna have a First Amendment that says freedom of speech, freedom of religion, then you have to be free and allow it. And we're not doing that.
Yeah. We
are a country who has lost its freedom of speech.
Yeah.
We're controlled by social media. That's why I don't have, right now, I don't get involved in, that's one of the issues in our campaign is one, we had Facebook and we had Twitter, but we were being censored. So people weren't seeing our stuff. I don't have, in private life, I don't have any of them except LinkedIn. And LinkedIn I only use to make contacts with people that, business related.
Yeah.
I do not use it as a social platform. I believe until the federal government makes them public entities like a utility, then we don't have freedom.
Now, what would you think on, I know we get censored quite a bit, but what would you think in terms of using platforms such as TikTok to at least try to reach people my age? I mean, I know a lot of people who lean conservative, but most likely didn't vote that way because our phone call and door knocking tactics didn't work.
No, I don't disagree. The problem is, as long as we're censoring, they're not going to be good.
Yeah.
The federal government has got to fix it. They got to say you cannot censor. You can censor hate. Maybe even then, I question if it's freedom of speech. It's freedom, and then let the society dictate what it's going to accept, not accept. But I mean, look what we're finding now with Musk, and he bought Twitter. Look what we're finding, that the federal government is
only
involved.
Mild collusion there.
Yeah, the federal government is involved.
Sure.
In censoring. I mean, this has just become really, really bad. I was born and brought up honoring the Constitution of the United States, and I feel very strongly that we should have freedom of religion and freedom of speech. If you don't like my speech, you can turn me off.
Yeah.
But I do not want somebody else turning me off, saying, I don't want people to hear what you just said, and shut it down. That's not right.
No, you're 100% right. And I guess the last question, and it goes back to the campaign as well. I heard this position presented to me. We often shied away from large campaign events let's say you had to run another This is what Paul Mills and I were talking about it. I'm talking like huge campaign events. Well, what would you think about maybe organizing more massive rallies rather than focusing efforts on like door-to-door campaigning?
Door-to-door, look, I'm not big on door-to-door, and I'm not big on mail, but Maine's a rural state. I don't know what you mean by large rallies. I mean, you go to Presque Isle and you get 300 people. That's a huge.
And yeah, exactly. What would you think on maybe?
I did that every day.
Sure.
See, this is the problem. People don't realize if everything that we put on Facebook was not censored and everybody saw it, I put on 65,000 miles.
Sure.
In a year, purely campaigning. Just the campaign.
Just the campaign.
Every day doing 3, 4, 5 events a day.
Wow.
And got nowheres. Why? Because the media wouldn't touch it. And if we put it on Facebook, their algorithms would limit or control who would see it.
Interesting.
And so, I mean, a Republican or a conservative in this society, particularly in the Northeast, New England, is really controlled.
And that proves, I mean, I worked directly for your campaign, and I didn't even know about half of these events. That shows how much we were censored. We
were out there every single day. We were trying to promote. We were trying to get the media to take us on. We'd go to parking lots and say he's going to be there with truckers and we're dealing with the diesel fuel, and we'd get 2 or 3 reporters. There's a couple of great reporters in the state. There are a couple of really good ones, but you can count them on a hand.
Interesting.
I can count them on one hand and have a couple of fingers left.
Wow. That's pretty sad.
It is really bad. Radio, there's maybe 2 in the whole radio world. TV, I don't have. There's 1 or 2 in TV that are fairer than the others. You got some stations. Bangor Daily News and Portland Press Herald are so bad that you can't even trust the obituaries.
That's a good way to put it.
I mean, they're just horrible.
Now, I might have to admit ignorance. What was the average size of those events you were making? Because I know I often saw like the ones at Dice Arts and the ones in Lewiston, but quite often I was on the campaign trail. So, what were the average size of your events?
I tell you, depending on what town you're in, if you go to Lewiston or Portland, it'd be hundreds.
Yeah.
If you go to Presque Isle, it'd be 50, 60. We go to Washington County. I mean, one day I went to Washington County with fishermen. We had about 500.
Yeah.
I mean, it depends, but we traveled a lot.
Yeah.
And you couldn't get the media there. We were fighting to get the media.
So, okay, so the battle came down to fight the media. If the media had come, most likely more people
would know about it.
Sure. Well, especially in this older state we have.
Yeah, the media just didn't want to cover us.
I see.
And you know, the media, Janet Mills is a darling of the media, and there's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
No doubt about it. She gets a free pass on everything.
Yeah.
And this lady is dishonest. Period.
Yeah.
With her position, what she did on abortion is outright lying to the Maine people. She said, the same day I said the law is fine the way it is, and she said, yeah, you're going to change it. I'm not going to change it. Now she's going to make it considerably worse than it is.
Sure.
So,
yeah, very interesting. Well, thank you so much, Governor.
I feel bad that the people are exposed to that, but it's not the first time. I mean, she's had her career. Her career has been very tainted with, as I said earlier, she's morally flexible with the truth.
That's an awesome way to put it. I can guarantee you I'm going to be using that phrase in the future.
She is morally flexible with the truth and always has been.
Sure.
I mean, she campaigned for a whole year back in 18 about the prison in down east. And she said day one she would reopen it. What did she end up doing? Exactly what we wanted to do. Exactly. Not quite exactly. She did only one facility. I was going to do two. They were going to be pre-release facility, one in Machias and one in Jonesport. And what she did is she put both in Cutler, the same location, and spent 3 times what we would have spent.
Wow.
We were going to spend about $1 million in each. So we were going to spend about $2 million. My understanding, the last number I heard was over $9 million.
Wow.
So
That's, that makes me think of the embassy in Jerusalem situation where, we were told it was going to be astronomical amounts of money, and then Trump looked in and said, oh, we have a building here, and we can spend significantly less. It's just businessman logic that politicians can't do.
It's just like what they're doing here at the exits and the off-ramp, on-ramp here in Augusta, putting the solar panels. Solar panels, solar energy in Maine. I drove by the other day and it was covered with snow. Well, when they cover with snow, they're not doing
anything.
They're not doing anything. They just, the Green New Deal is nothing more than an enormous amount of money going to their friends. That's all it is.
100% right.
There's nothing about the environment that's good about solar panels. What do you do when they stop producing?
Exactly.
Where do you put them?
Yep.
The other thing, they're turning a lot of our farmland into solar fields. Do you realize that they got to use chemicals to keep the vegetation down so that it doesn't go above the panel? And they got to use vegetation 2-3 times a year. Chemicals. It's just incredible. They just it's just amazing. And what's the cost of electricity right now? Absolutely incredible.
Incredibly high.
Yeah. and all of their friends are making a lot of money.
Oh, you're 100% right. We should look into, researching and developing, quote, renewable energies, but we should not be jumping on it right now as if it's the fix-all, save-all.
How about hydro is renewable everywhere in the world except for Maine.
Yep.
In Maine, it's only renewable up to 100 megawatts. After that, it's brown. What is wrong with that mentality?
That doesn't make any sense.
I know, but that's the law in Maine. That is the law. It's a physical law. You cannot buy more than 100 megawatts of hydro and call it green. Seabrook.
Wow.
Seabrook. We have Seabrook nuclear power plant. We buy none. None of that power. It's available, but we don't want it because it's nuclear. It's the cheapest there is.
Oh, nuclear, everyone thinks it's super dangerous and super unclean. It's the clean. Isn't it? I could be wrong, but isn't it the cleanest?
It is the cleanest, and it is one of the safest. I will agree that 40 years ago, in the 70s, 80s, the early generations of nuclear were, you could have accidents. Not anymore.
Yeah.
The way that they're, particularly the new modular ones, the way that they're constructed, they cannot leak.
Yeah.
Unless they're sabotaged.
Sure.
And that's what they're saying, well, somebody can come in and blow them up. Well, yeah, you can blow up Hoover Dam if you want to.
Yeah, exactly.
That'll flood a whole state.
Sure.
But the lack of common sense, the lack of just good fact checking and good research is just gone.
Well, I usually don't like to hear the term common sense in politics because usually it just means go along with what I want. But I mean, for everyone who's listened to this interview so far, they've heard a lot of common sense.
Yeah, it's just so simple. There's an organization in Maine, in NRCM, Natural Resource Council of Maine, fighting the transmission line from Canada. And it is the most stupid arguments that I've ever seen. They are putting out false information. They're putting out false photographs, and I saw the Tucker Carlson video, and they had these 500-foot towers. That's using 90-foot wood poles. There's no towers.
Yeah.
The towers are for AC. This is a DC line. Then they use pictures of a wood yard for SAPI. That's for making paper. It had nothing to do with the transmission line.
Wow.
And then you go up and you take a look at these wind farms. The roads, in order to get those blades up on mountains, you've got to have 300-foot roads wide. You got to clear like 300 feet so that they.
Yeah, you go up to Kingsbury, you can see it.
And it's just so insane what's going on out there.
Sure.
But what the problem is you're only getting the reporting on one side, and everybody believes what they hear on TV and radio.
And if you question it, you're just called a conspiracy theorist.
Oh yeah.
So
it's too bad, because I just feel really, really bad that Maine people are subjected to such high cost electricity, and it's only a handful of people making a ton of money, and everybody else is paying. You know, I used to say, if you get a $500,000 house and you got solar panels on your roof, the people paying for those solar panels live in trailer parks.
yeah. Well, I'm trying to remember. What did Janet do when she put up solar panels in front of the Blaine house? Didn't she not? I'm trying to remember. What was the statue in front of the Blaine house?
It was Peter. What was his name? Peter, the governor. His son died.
Can't think of the name.
Jesus, Ernie. It was the governor before King. God, how quick we forget.
I can't remember, but didn't she take down that statue?
It's not a statue.
Or a monument?
It was a tree and a plaque on the
Yeah.
ground. Peter, what was his name?
Can't think of the name for the life of me. I'm going to say the blessing of technology.
McKernan.
Yeah.
Peter McKernan. John McKernan's son died when John McKernan was the governor. And what they did is a group planted a tree and had a little marker. We would take the marker out and put it in the Blaine house during the winter months, and then put it back out in the spring.
Yeah.
And she completely took it out and put a solar panel.
Wow.
I don't know.
It doesn't make much logical sense, but, well, Governor LePage, I really appreciate this. I know you got to get going, but thank you so much.
My
I've
pleasure.
really enjoyed the discussion, and hopefully some people can listen to this and get some Maine common sense, and hopefully, as we said, move Maine forward, move the rest of the nation forward.
Yeah, well, I'm not a big fan of the media, so.
I was going to say, until there's some serious changes in the media, I doubt how much we can do, but...
The problem with media is I can live with the left and what they say. I mean, I don't agree with them, but that's fine. But our schools are controlled by the left. Our media is controlled by the left. Hollywood's controlled by the left. And so there's very little pathway for differing opinions.
Yep.
And so debate in our country is gone. The First Amendment's pretty much gone. And until a generation, and it will happen. It happened in Russia, and for 75 years, the Russian people were controlled by the oligarchs, which is pretty much where we are right now. The oligarchs, social media, they control.
The elites, yeah.
The elites control the country for 75 years. But then perestroika came, and the churches started reopening. And now you go to Russia. In 2005, I went to Russia. You went to a church. It was all young people.
Sure.
It's all the young people. The old people, they never gave up on their religion, so they were praying in their homes. But the young people now were exposed, and so in 2005 I went, and while the economy was really bad, grocery stores were empty. There was a movement. You could feel it. The churches were being rebuilt, and the icons were coming back. And then in 2008 I went, and man, oh man, you'll never get their freedom away.
Yeah.
And as much as Putin is trying, he's having a really rough time controlling the masses now because they don't want to go back.
Yeah.
And so when you young folks finally put your foot down and say enough is enough, then we can save the country. But we can't save it without you folks.
And that's hopefully what we can do is younger people like myself and people like you working together and really making a difference, making our voice heard and saying, hey, we're not going to stand for this. I think that's a big problem. You know, we blame the left for a lot of the problems, but people on our side of the aisle have been silent for too long.
Yeah. The part that bothers me is allowing your freedom of speech to be taken from you.
Yeah.
That really is a problem. And if you say anything, you're a racist. Well, God, I've been called racist. I've been called everything in the book. But I'm the only guy in the statewide political arena in the state of Maine. I'm the only one with a black son.
Interesting. Yet you're the racist.
And I'm the racist, and I'm the one that helped a whole lot of people.
No, you're 100%. I mean, just because I spoke out on Facebook about not necessarily thinking a drag event being openly hosted at our local theater was a great idea. Just that. I've been referred to as a KKK member, an asshole, a poor excuse for a human being, and a whole multitude of other things. Just because I was open on, hey, maybe, yeah, this isn't the greatest of ideas.
Well, I don't know I don't know about that, but I will say this. Who started the KKK?
Yeah.
Democrat.
Yeah, exactly. So
I don't know. But our freedom of speech is under attack.
Yep.
That's the one thing I like about Florida. You have a governor, Texas, Florida, Virginia. You have governors that really, really.
Trying to remember, what's Kristi Noem's state?
South Dakota.
Yep.
And there's another one, North Dakota, same way. They're very McMaster's, South Carolina. They're very sensitive to the freedom of speech. Here in Maine, we've taken it away from people.
Yep. Well,
okay.
Governor, I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Very good.